The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor buzzed like angry wasps as I pushed through the double doors at 6:45 that Tuesday morning. My scrub still smelled like the lavender detergent I'd switched to after my landlord complained about the clinical smell seeping into the hallway of my Brooklyn apartment. I had my coffee in one hand, black, from the bodega on Flatbush where the owner knew my order before I reached the counter, and my badge in the other. It was supposed to be a routine shift. Gallbladder removal at 8. Maybe an appendectomy in the afternoon if Dr. Reeves needed an extra pair of hands. I'd been a surgical nurse at Metropolitan General for 3 years, and I knew the rhythm of this place like I knew my own heartbeat. But the moment I saw Patricia Dunmore standing outside the scrub room with her arms crossed and that expression on her face, the one that made new residents cry in supply closets, I knew something was wrong. She was the nursing supervisor, my direct boss, and she'd been gunning for me ever since I'd questioned her decision to reuse certain surgical instruments last month. She stepped directly into my path, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive and cold. Her voice dropped low. "We need to talk. Now." She didn't wait for my response. She grabbed my elbow and steered me into the empty break room, shutting the door behind us with a click that sounded too much like a lock. "I'm assigning you to post-op today," Patricia said, not looking at me. She was organizing papers on the counter, her movements sharp and deliberate. "Jenkins will cover the OR." My stomach dropped. Jenkins was a first-year nurse who still forgot to check patient wristbands half the time. And I was supposed to scrub in on Mrs. Kowalski's surgery, a complex procedure involving mesh repair that Dr. Chun had specifically requested me for because I'd assisted on her initial consultation. "Dr. Chun asked for me specifically," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He needs someone who knows the case history." Patricia turned to face me then, and her eyes were hard as glass. "I don't care what Dr. Chun asked for. I'm telling you to stay out of the OR today. Consider it a direct order." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. A direct order. That wasn't protocol language. That was threat language. "Can I ask why?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Let's just say there are concerns about your performance. Protocol concerns. I'll be reviewing your recent cases, and until that review is complete, I don't want you anywhere near an operating room. Are we clear?" My hands were shaking. I set my coffee down on the counter before she could see. Protocol concerns. That was code for, "I'm building a case against you," and we both knew it. I'd seen her do this before. To Maria, who'd reported a medication error, and to Devon, who'd questioned why we were using expired sutures. Both of them were gone within 3 months. "I haven't done anything wrong," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they didn't matter. In Patricia's world, wrong was whatever threatened her control. "Then you have nothing to worry about," she said sweetly. "Go to post-op. I'll handle our assignments from now on." She left the break room, and I stood there staring at the door, my entire body cold. 3 years of perfect evaluations. 3 years of 60-hour weeks and skipped holidays. 3 years of building trust with surgeons who actually respected my judgment. And now Patricia was going to take it all away because I dared to question her. I grabbed my coffee and walked toward post-op on autopilot, my mind racing. Mrs. Kowalski's surgery was scheduled for 8. That gave me an hour to figure out what to do. But then, as I passed the nurse's station, the overhead intercom crackled to life. "Surgical nurse Rodriguez 2 or 3. Surgical nurse Rodriguez 2 or 3 immediately." My feet stopped moving. Or 3. That was where Mrs. Kowalski's procedure was happening. And that voice, that was Dr. James Whitmore. The chief of surgery. He never paged nurses directly. He barely knew most of our names. My badge started vibrating. A text from an unknown number. Or 3. Now. Whitmore. I looked down the hallway toward post-op, where Patricia expected me to be. Then I looked toward the surgical wing, where the chief of surgery was waiting. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't just about one surgery anymore. This was about whether I was going to let Patricia Dunmore control my entire career. This was about whether I had the guts to walk into that operating room knowing she could destroy me for it. The intercom crackled again. "Rodriguez. Or 3. This is urgent." I started walking toward the surgical wing. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I pushed through the doors and headed straight for the scrub room, where I could already see Dr. Whitmore through the glass window, gloved and waiting. He looked up and saw me. He nodded once, sharp, authoritative, final. I started scrubbing in. The water was so hot it turned my skin pink, but I barely felt it. I was counting in my head, 15 seconds per hand, between each finger, under the nails, the ritual that had become as automatic as breathing. Through the window, I could see in 2 or 3. Mrs. Kowalski was already under, her chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Patel, was monitoring her vitals. 2 residents stood on the opposite side of the table, and Dr. Whitmore was staring directly at me. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair and a reputation for being brilliant and ruthless in equal measure. Surgeons feared him, administrators feared him more, and right now, he was waiting for me to make a choice. I heard footsteps behind me. Fast, angry footsteps. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Patricia. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Her voice was a hiss, low and venomous. I kept scrubbing. 15 seconds. "Dr. Whitmore paged me," I said, not looking at her. "I gave you a direct order." Now I turned. Water dripped from my hands onto the tile floor. Patricia's face was white with fury, but there was something else there too, something that looked almost like fear. "And the chief of surgery gave me a direct page," I said quietly. "So which order do you want me to follow?" For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then she leaned in close, so close I could see the tiny lines around her mouth. "If you walk into that or, I will make sure you never work in this hospital again. Do you understand me?" I understood perfectly, but I also understood that if I walked away now, I'd be walking away from everything I'd worked for. Everything I believed about what it meant to be a good nurse. Dr. Whitmore's voice came through the intercom, calm and clear. "Rodriguez, we're ready for you." I pushed past Patricia and walked in 2 or 3. The door sealed behind me with a pneumatic hiss. The room smelled like antiseptic and cold air. Dr. Whitmore looked up from the table. "You're late," he said, but there was something in his eyes. Approval, maybe, or recognition. "Scrub in. You're lead surgical nurse on this case." Lead surgical nurse. Not assistant. Not second chair. Lead. Behind the glass window, I could see Patricia standing in the observation gallery. Her arms were crossed. Her face was stone. And I knew with absolute certainty that I just made an enemy who would never forgive me. Dr. Whitmore held out his hand for the scalpel. "Let's begin," he said. The scalpel felt heavier than usual in my hand as I passed it to Dr. Whitmore. His fingers closed around the instrument with the kind of precision that came from 30 years of cutting into human bodies. The first incision was clean, a straight line through Mrs. Kowalski's lower abdomen, releasing a thin ribbon of blood that I immediately blotted with gauze. "Suction," Dr. Whitmore said, and I was already there, the tube in position before he finished the word. This was the dance I knew, the rhythm I'd spent 3 years perfecting. But something felt different today. The air in R3 was too still, too quiet except for the steady beep of the heart monitor and the hiss of the ventilator. Dr. Patel glanced up from his anesthesia cart, his dark eyes unreadable behind his surgical mask. The 2 residents, Chong and Morrison, stood frozen on the opposite side of the table like they were watching an execution instead of a routine hernia repair. And through the observation window, Patricia Dunmore hadn't moved. She stood there like a statue, her arms still crossed, her eyes burning holes through my skull. Dr. Whitmore worked deeper into the tissue, his movements methodical and unhurried. "Retractor," he said. I handed it to him, and he positioned it to hold back the muscle wall. That's when I saw it, a flash of something that shouldn't be there. Dark tissue. Necrotic tissue. My breath caught. "Doctor," I said carefully. "Left quadrant. Do you see that discoloration?" Whitmore paused. He leaned in closer, adjusting the overhead light. The 2 residents shifted nervously. "Rodriguez is right," Whitmore said quietly. "We've got necrosis. Significant necrosis." He looked up at me, and there was something in his eyes that made my stomach clench. This isn't a standard mesh repair anymore. Mrs. Kowalski has been walking around with a rupture that's been deteriorating for weeks, maybe months. Someone missed this. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Someone missed this. Mrs. Kowalski had been seen for pre-op consultations. She'd had imaging done. She'd met with surgeons and nurses, and been cleared for what everyone said was a routine procedure. And now Dr. Whitmore was telling me that someone, maybe multiple someones, had missed a potentially fatal complication. "We need to debride," Whitmore said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "Rodriguez, I need you to anticipate blood loss. Get 2 units ready. Morrison, call for a vascular consult. This is going to take longer than planned." I moved fast, signaling to the circulating nurse outside to prep the blood. My mind was racing. Who had done Mrs. Kowalski's initial assessment? Who had looked at her scans and signed off on a routine repair when there was clear evidence of tissue death? I pulled up her chart on the tablet mounted near the door, scrolling through the digital records with my elbow while keeping my gloved hand sterile. And there it was, the pre-op consultation notes, signed by Dr. Marcus Chun. My stomach dropped. Dr. Chun was one of the best surgeons in the department. He was meticulous, careful, the kind of doctor who triple-checked everything. If he'd missed this, it wasn't because he was careless. It was because someone had given him incomplete information, or because someone had altered the records. I scrolled further back. The imaging reports. The CT scan from 2 weeks ago. And that's when I saw the note in the margin, a small addendum, dated 5 days after the original scan. Reviewed by Nursing Supervisor P. Dunmore. No significant abnormalities noted. Patient cleared for standard procedure. My blood went cold. Patricia had reviewed the scans. Patricia had cleared Mrs. Kowalski. And Patricia had missed, or ignored, the signs of necrosis that were now threatening this woman's life. "Rodriguez!" Dr. Whitmore's voice snapped me back to the table. "I need you here. Now." I abandoned the tablet and moved back into position. Whitmore was working faster now, cutting away the dead tissue with controlled urgency. Blood pooled in the cavity faster than I could suction it away. "She's losing pressure," Dr. Patel said from behind his monitors. "BP dropping to 90/60. "I see it," Whitmore said. His voice was calm, but his hands moved with increased speed. "Rodriguez, compress here. Morrison, get ready with hemostatic agents." I pressed down on the bleeding vessel with gauze, feeling the warm pulse of blood against my palm. Mrs. Kowalski's heart rate spiked on the monitor, 140, 150. "Too fast." "Doctor, she's tachycardic," I said. "I know." Whitmore was tying off the vessel now, his sutures quick and precise. "Patel, push vasopressors. We need to stabilize her before I can finish this debridement." The minutes stretched like hours. My arms ached from holding the compression. Sweat rolled down my spine under my surgical gown. Through the observation window, I saw Patricia pull out her phone. She typed something quickly, her face tight with anger. Or fear. Or both. Who was she texting? "Pressure stabilizing," Patel announced. BP back to 100/65. Heart rate dropping to 120. Whitmore nodded. "Good. Rodriguez, I need to see the full extent of the damage. When I lift the section, be ready with irrigation. I want a clear field." I positioned the irrigation syringe, my hand steady despite the adrenaline screaming through my veins. Whitmore lifted the compromised tissue, and I flooded the cavity with sterile saline. What I saw made my throat tighten. The necrosis went deeper than anyone had anticipated, spreading along the abdominal wall like roots of a poisonous tree. This wasn't something that had developed overnight. This had been growing for weeks, and someone had looked at Mrs. Kowalski's scans and decided it wasn't worth mentioning. "Jesus," Morrison whispered. "This could have killed her." "It still might," Whitmore said grimly. "But not today. Not in my OR." He worked for another 90 minutes, cutting away every trace of dead tissue, reinforcing the abdominal wall with surgical mesh, checking and rechecking every suture. I anticipated every instrument, every request, moving in perfect synchronization with him. This was why I'd become a nurse. Not for the paycheck or the prestige, but for this, the knowledge that my hands, my judgment, my presence in this room could mean the difference between life and death. Finally, Whitmore stepped back from the table. "Close her up," he said to the residents. Then he looked at me. "Rodriguez, outside. Now." My heart hammered as I stripped off my gloves and followed him out over 3. In the scrub room, He pulled down his mask and stared at me with an intensity that made me want to look away. But I didn't. "Do you know what you just saw in there?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Tell me." I took a breath. Mrs. Kowalski had significant necrotic tissue that should have been identified during pre-op assessment. Someone cleared her for routine surgery when she needed emergency intervention. If we hadn't caught it today, she would have died from sepsis within a week. Whitmore nodded slowly. "And do you know whose name is on the clearance forms?" "Patricia Dunmore's." His eyes narrowed. 2 months ago, I started noticing irregularities in pre-op assessments. Patients cleared for procedures when they shouldn't have been. Complications that should have been caught earlier. I started an internal review. Quiet. Confidential. And every single case traced back to one person. He didn't need to say the name. I already knew. "Why did you page me today?" I asked. "Why not Dr. Chen's regular team?" Whitmore crossed his arms. "Because Dr. Chen doesn't know yet that his reputation is being used as a shield for someone else's negligence. And because I needed someone in that, or who I knew wouldn't be loyal to Patricia Dunmore. Someone who would tell the truth about what they saw." He paused. "You questioned her last month about instrument sterilization protocols, didn't you?" I nodded. "She's been targeting you ever since." "I know. I've been watching." My mouth went dry. "Sir, she told me this morning that she's reviewing my performance. She's going to try to fire me." Whitmore's expression hardened. "Not if I fire her first." He pulled out his phone and started typing. "I'm documenting everything we saw in that or today. And I'm filing a formal complaint with the board. This ends now." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by terror. Because I knew Patricia Dunmore. I knew she wouldn't go down without destroying everyone in her path. "She has friends on the board," I said quietly. "Administrators who protect her." Whitmore looked up from his phone. "So do I. Better friends." He finished typing and hit send. "You did good work in there today, Rodriguez. Mrs. Kowalski is alive because you had the guts to walk into that, or when you were ordered not to. That takes courage. Don't lose it now." He walked away, leaving me standing alone in the scrub room. Through the window, I could see Patricia in the observation gallery, still on her phone, still watching, and I knew that whatever war had been brewing between us had just exploded into open combat. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I didn't need to ask who sent it. I walked to the locker room and sat down on the bench, my legs suddenly weak. My entire body was shaking, not from fear, but from the realization of what I'd just done. I'd stood up to Patricia Dunmore. I'd exposed her negligence. And now there was no going back. Another text. This one from my friend Keisha, who worked in administration. "Girl, what did you do? Patricia just stormed into HR demanding your termination. She's saying you violated direct orders and endangered a patient. They're calling an emergency meeting." My hands went cold. Of course. Patricia wasn't going to wait for Whitmore's complaint to reach the board. She was going to strike first, twist the narrative, make me the villain. I typed back. "When's the meeting?" 4 p.m. Director's office. "You better have a damn good lawyer." I didn't have a lawyer. I had 3 years of perfect evaluations, a patient who was alive because I disobeyed orders, and a chief of surgery who said he'd back me up. I hoped it would be enough. I changed out of my surgical scrubs and into my street clothes, jeans, and a faded Columbia University sweatshirt I'd bought at a thrift store in Park Slope. My hands were still shaking as I tied my sneakers. 4 p.m. That gave me 6 hours to prepare for a fight that could end my career. I walked out of the locker room and headed toward the hospital cafeteria. I needed coffee. I needed food. I needed to think. But as I pushed through the double doors, I nearly collided with someone coming the other way. Dr. Marcus Chun. He grabbed my shoulders to steady me, his face creased with concern. "Rodriguez, I heard what happened in R3. Are you okay?" I looked up at him. This man whose name was on forms he'd probably never even seen, whose reputation was being used as a weapon. And I made a decision. "Dr. Chun," I said quietly, "we need to talk." Dr. Chun led me to a quiet corner booth in the cafeteria, away from the clusters of residents and nurses grabbing lunch between shifts. The smell of burnt coffee and industrial mac and cheese hung in the air. He set down 2 cups, black coffee for both of us, and leaned forward with his elbows on the table. His white coat was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. I told him about Patricia cornering me that morning, about the direct order to stay out of the OR. I told him about Whitmore's page, about Mrs. Kowalski's necrotic tissue, about the pre-op clearance forms with his signature and Patricia's notes. I told him about the text messages and the emergency meeting scheduled for 4 p.m. When I finished, Dr. Chin sat back in his seat and dragged his hand down his face. He looked 10 years older than he had 5 minutes ago. "I never reviewed those scans personally," he said quietly. "Patricia told me she'd already done the assessment. She said Mrs. Kowalski was a straightforward case, standard mesh repair, no complications expected. I trusted her judgment." His voice cracked on the last word. "You trusted your nursing supervisor," I said. "That's not a crime. That's how hospitals are supposed to work. But it's my name on those forms. My signature. If Mrs. Kowalski had died on that table today, it would have been my license on the line." He looked at me with something close to desperation. "How many others, Rodriguez? How many other patients has she cleared without proper assessment?" I pulled out my phone and opened the notes I'd started keeping 2 months ago, back when I first noticed the pattern. Back when Maria got fired for asking questions. "At least 7 cases in the past 3 months, I said, showing him the screen. All of them pre-op assessments, signed off by Patricia. All of them had complications during surgery that should have been identified earlier. 2 of them ended up in the ICU for extended stays. Dr. Chen stared at the list, his jaw tight. "Why didn't you report this sooner?" "I tried. I went to the department supervisor. She told me I was being paranoid and that Patricia Dunmore had 15 years of excellent service. She said if I kept making accusations without proof, I'd be the one facing disciplinary action." I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter and lukewarm, so I started documenting everything. Quietly, I figured eventually someone would notice the pattern. And now Whitmore has. Dr. Chen set down his cup, so hard it sloshed onto the table. "Jesus, she's been using my reputation as cover, making it look like I approve procedures I never even looked at." He pulled out his own phone and started scrolling through something. His face went pale. "What?" I asked. "I just checked my email. There's a message from HR, dated an hour ago. They're requesting I attend a meeting this afternoon to discuss concerns about surgical protocols and patient safety." His eyes met mine. 4 p.m. Director's office. The same meeting. Patricia wasn't just coming after me. She was coming after both of us. "She's going to blame you," I said, the realization hitting me like cold water. "She's going to say that you were negligent, that you failed to properly review cases, and that I violated protocol by questioning your judgment. She's turning us against each other." Dr. Chen's expression hardened. "Not if we get ahead of this first." He stood up abruptly. "Come with me. Now." I followed him out of the cafeteria and down the hallway toward the administrative wing. We passed nurses rushing between rooms, orderlies pushing gurneys, residents studying charts on tablets. The hospital moved around us like a river, indifferent to the war being waged in its corridors. Dr. Chen stopped outside a frosted glass door marked Risk Management, J. Torres. He knocked twice and pushed it open without waiting for an answer. Jennifer Torres looked up from her desk, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a reputation for being ruthlessly fair. She handled malpractice claims, internal investigations, and anything else that threatened to blow up in the hospital's face. "Dr. Chen," she said, surprised. "I wasn't expecting. We need to talk," he interrupted. "Right now. About Patricia Dunmore." Torres's expression shifted. She glanced at me, then back at Chen. "Close the door." I shut the door and stood next to Dr. Chen while he laid out everything. The pattern of negligent pre-op assessments, Mrs. Kowalski's near-fatal complication, Patricia's use of a signature to cover her mistakes. He spoke quickly, precisely, like he was presenting findings at a medical conference. Torres listened without interrupting, her fingers steepled under her chin. When Dr. Chen finished, she turned to me. "And you're the nurse Patricia ordered to stay out of the OR this morning." "Yes, ma'am. But you went in anyway." "On Dr. Whitmore's direct page." "Yes, ma'am." Torres leaned back in her chair. "Patricia has already filed a formal complaint against you. She's alleging insubordination, violation of direct orders, and reckless endangerment of a patient. She wants you terminated immediately. My stomach clenched, but I kept my voice steady. Is that what the 4 p.m. meeting is about? Partially. It's also about Dr. Chen's alleged failure to properly oversee pre-op protocols. Torres folded her hands on her desk. But here's what Patricia doesn't know. Dr. Whitmore filed his own complaint 30 minutes ago, and he included documentation of every case he's been tracking for the past 2 months. Cases that match the pattern you just described. She opened a folder on her desk and pulled out a printed spreadsheet. 7 patients. Inadequate pre-op assessments. All cleared by Patricia Dunmore. All resulted in surgical complications that extended hospital stays and increased risk of morbidity. Dr. Chen exhaled slowly. So what happens now? Torres looked between us. Now, I'm going to ask you both a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you believe Patricia Dunmore is actively endangering patients, or do you believe she's simply overwhelmed and making mistakes? I didn't hesitate. She's covering up mistakes to protect the hospital's reputation and her own position. She fires anyone who questions her. She alters records. And she knew Mrs. Kowalski's scans showed necrosis, but she cleared her anyway because admitting the problem would mean admitting she'd been negligent. Torres wrote something down. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, Dr. Chen said. And I can prove it. Give me access to the imaging archives. I'll show you exactly what Patricia saw when she reviewed those scans and what she chose to ignore. Torres considered this for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and dialed an extension. This is Torres. I need you to pull all pre-op imaging and assessment records for Patricia Dunmore over the past 6 months. Priority access. Send them to my secure server. She hung up and looked at us. You have until 4 p.m. to build your case. If you can prove a pattern of negligence, I'll take it to the board tonight. But if you can't, Patricia's complaint stands, and you're both facing disciplinary action. Understood. Understood, Dr. Chen said. I nodded. We left Torres's office and headed straight for the medical records department in the basement, a fluorescent-lit maze of file cabinets and computer terminals that smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Dr. Chen logged into one of the terminals and started pulling up imaging files. I stood behind him, watching as scan after scan appeared on the screen. Mrs. Kowalski's CT from 2 weeks ago. There, clear as day, the dark shadow of necrotic tissue spreading along the abdominal wall. Patricia's note in the margin. No significant abnormalities. Next one, I said. Dr. Chen pulled up another file. A 53-year-old man named Robert Delaney, scheduled for gallbladder removal. The ultrasound showed signs of cholecystitis, inflammation that should have warranted a more aggressive surgical approach. Patricia's note. Standard laparoscopic procedure approved. He ended up in the ICU for 5 days with sepsis, I said, checking my own notes. I remember because I was assigned to his post-op care. He almost died. Dr. Chen's jaw tightened. Next! We went through 5 more cases. Every single one showed the same pattern. Clear evidence of complications in the imaging, dismissed or downplayed in Patricia's notes. By the time we finished, it was 2:30 p.m. This is enough, Dr. Chen said. This proves she's been systematically ignoring red flags. But why? I asked. What does she gain from clearing patients who shouldn't be cleared? Dr. Chen stared at the screen for a long moment. Then his eyes widened. Surgical volume. What? Look at the dates. Every one of these cases was scheduled during months when the hospital was under pressure to increase surgical volume. More surgeries mean more billing, more revenue, better performance metrics. If Patricia started flagging cases as high risk, they'd get delayed or transferred to other facilities. The numbers would drop. He turned to look at me. She's been prioritizing hospital revenue over patient safety. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I thought about Mrs. Kowalski, lying on that operating table with tissue dying inside her body. I thought about Robert Delaney, fighting sepsis in the ICU while administrators celebrated hitting their quarterly targets. We need to send this to Torres, I said. Dr. Chen was already compiling the files. Done. I'm also copying Whitmore and the board chair. This goes public today. He hit send, and we both stood there in the basement, surrounded by the archives of 1,000 lives reduced to data points and billing codes. My phone buzzed. A text from Keisha. Meeting moved up to 3 p.m. Patricia convinced the director it's urgent. Get here now. I show Dr. Chen. He checked his watch. That gives us 15 minutes. We ran. When we burst into the administrative wing, Patricia was already there, standing outside the director's office with her arms crossed and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was wearing a pressed navy blazer and pearls, her armor for official proceedings. Rodriguez, she said sweetly. I wasn't sure you'd show. I thought maybe you'd already started packing your things. I'm not going anywhere, I said. Patricia's smile widened. We'll see. The director's door opened. Margaret Ashford, the hospital director, stood in the doorway, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for running Metropolitan General like a military operation. Inside, all of you. Now. We filed into her office. Dr. Whitmore was already there, standing by the window with his arms crossed. Jennifer Torres sat in one of the chairs, her laptop open. And in the corner, to my shock, was Dr. Patel, the anesthesiologist from our 3. Margaret Ashford shut the door and sat behind her desk. Let's make this simple, she said, her voice cold and precise. Someone in this room has been lying, and before we leave, I'm going to know who. She looked directly at Patricia. Miss Dunmore, would you like to start? Patricia didn't flinch. She smoothed her blazer and stood a little straighter, her hands clasped in front of her like she was about to deliver a eulogy. Thank you, Director Ashford, she said, her voice perfectly calibrated, respectful but firm. I'll be direct. This morning, I gave Nurse Rodriguez a clear directive to stay out of the operating room due to ongoing performance concerns. She disobeyed that order, entered OR3 without proper authorization, and participated in a surgical procedure that nearly resulted in patient harm. She turned to look at me, and her eyes were cold as winter. Rodriguez has a history of questioning protocols, undermining authority, and creating disruption in the surgical department. I've documented multiple instances over the past 2 months where she's overstepped her role and interfered with physician decision-making. Dr. Chen started to speak, but Margaret raised her hand to silence him. Continue, Miss Dunmore. Patricia pulled a manila folder from under her arm and set it on the desk. I have written statements from 3 staff members who've expressed concerns about Rodriguez's behavior. I also have documentation showing that she accessed patient records outside of her assigned cases, a clear HIPAA violation, and that she's been collecting information about surgical outcomes in a manner that suggests she was building a case against hospital staff. My heart pounded. She turned my documentation, my attempt to protect patients, into evidence of misconduct. Furthermore, Patricia continued, Dr. Chen signed off on Mrs. Kowalski's pre-op assessment. The responsibility for that patient's clearance falls on the attending physician, not on nursing staff. If there was an error in judgment, it originated with Dr. Chen, not with me. I simply followed established protocol. Dr. Chen's face went red. That's a lie. You told me you'd reviewed the scans personally. You told me. I reviewed them and found them acceptable, Patricia interrupted smoothly. If you disagree with my clinical judgment, that's your prerogative. But my assessment was based on 15 years of experience, and I stand by it. She turned back to Margaret. What we have here is a nurse who violated direct orders, a physician who's trying to deflect responsibility for his own oversight, and a patient who, thankfully, survived despite the chaos these 2 created in my operating room. The silence that followed was suffocating. Margaret Ashford stared at Patricia for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Dr. Whitmore. Chief Whitmore, you paged Rodriguez to OR3 this morning. Why? Whitmore stepped forward, his voice measured and deliberate. Because I've been conducting an internal review of surgical complications for the past 2 months, and I needed someone in that, or who would document exactly what they saw. Someone who wouldn't be influenced by departmental politics. Margaret's eyebrows rose. You orchestrated this? I facilitated it. Mrs. Kowalski's case was flagged in my review as high risk. When I saw that Patricia had cleared her for standard procedure despite clear imaging, evidence of necrosis, I knew something was wrong. So yes, I bypassed Ms. Dunmore's authority and brought Rodriguez into that, or because I trusted her clinical judgment more than I trusted Patricia's. The words landed like grenades. Patricia's face went pale. That's absurd. You're basing this on 7 cases. Jennifer Torres interrupted, opening her laptop. 7 patients over the past 3 months, all cleared for surgery by you, Miss Dunmore, all of whom developed complications that should have been identified during pre-op assessment. She turned the screen to face Margaret. Dr. Chun and Nurse Rodriguez provided documentation this afternoon. Every case shows the same pattern, imaging evidence of high-risk factors, dismissed in your assessment notes. And in every case, the surgeries were scheduled during periods when the hospital was under pressure to increase surgical volume. Margaret leaned forward, studying the screen. Her expression darkened. Dr. Patel, she said, not looking up. You were in OR3 this morning. What did you observe? Dr. Patel shifted uncomfortably. He was a quiet man, methodical and precise, the kind of person who avoided conflict like radiation. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. Mrs. Kowalski should never have been cleared for standard procedure. The necrosis was extensive. If Dr. Whitmore and Nurse Rodriguez hadn't caught it, she would have died within days from septic shock. He paused, then added, I've also noticed an increase in unexpected complications during procedures over the past few months. Cases where the pre-op assessment didn't match what we found during surgery. I didn't report it because I assumed it was just bad luck. But after today, I believe there's a systemic problem. Margaret closed the laptop and looked at Patricia. Miss Dunmore, did you knowingly clear patients for surgery despite evidence of high-risk complications? Absolutely not, Patricia said, but there was a tremor in her voice now. Medical imaging is subjective. Different clinicians can interpret the same scan in different ways. I made the best judgment I could with the information available. Then explain this. Jennifer Torres pulled out a printed document and slid it across the desk. This is an email you sent to the surgical scheduling coordinator 6 weeks ago. I'm going to read the relevant portion aloud. She adjusted her glasses. We need to hit our Q3 targets. I'm reviewing pre-op cases and will prioritize clearances to keep the OR schedule full. Minor complications can be managed post-op if necessary. Revenue first. The room went silent. Patricia's face drained of color. That was taken out of context, she said quickly. I was referring to administrative efficiency, not clinical decision-making. I would never compromise patient safety for what? Dr. Whitmore's voice cut through her words like a scalpel. For a performance bonus? For a promotion? For keeping your job during budget cuts? He stepped closer, and his voice dropped to something dangerous. I've been a surgeon for 30 years. I've seen a lot of things in hospitals, mistakes, ego, negligence. But I've never seen someone deliberately gamble with patient lives for a spreadsheet. Patricia's hands were shaking now. You have no proof that we have 7 patients, I said, and everyone turned to look at me. My voice was steady, even though my heart was hammering. 7 people who trusted this hospital to keep them safe. 7 people who could have died because you decided their lives were worth less than a quarterly report. I pulled out my phone and opened the notes I'd been keeping, the ones Patricia had tried to spin as evidence against me. Maria Gonzalez, fired 2 months ago for reporting expired sutures. Devin Harris, forced to resign after questioning instrument sterilization protocols. Robert Delaney, 5 days in the ICU with sepsis that could have been prevented. Mrs. Kowalski, hours away from dying on your watch. I looked directly at Patricia. You didn't just make mistakes. You silenced anyone who tried to stop you. You weaponized your authority to protect yourself instead of your patients. And you did it all while hiding behind 15 years of good service and other people's reputations. Patricia's face twisted with rage. You self-righteous little. Enough. Margaret Ashford stood up, and the command in her voice froze everyone in place. Miss Dunmore, you're suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. You'll surrender your badge and access credentials before you leave this building. Patricia stared at her in disbelief. You can't. I can and I am. If this investigation confirms what I've heard today, you'll be terminated and reported to the State Nursing Board. You'll never work in a hospital again. Margaret turned to Jennifer Torres. I want a complete audit of every case Patricia Dunmore touched in the past year. I want patient outcomes, imaging reviews, and interviews with every staff member who worked under her supervision. And I want it on my desk in 72 hours. Torres nodded. Margaret looked at Dr. Chun. You're cleared of wrongdoing, but I expect you to personally review every one of your cases going forward. No more delegating to nursing supervisors. Understood. Yes, ma'am, Dr. Chun said quietly. Then Margaret turned to me. Rodriguez, you violated a direct order from your supervisor this morning. My stomach dropped. Yes, ma'am. I did. You also saved a patient's life and exposed a dangerous pattern of negligence. That took guts. She paused. But it also put you in an impossible position. You should never have had to choose between following orders and doing what was right. She picked up a folder from her desk and handed it to me. Effective immediately, you're being transferred out of Patricia Dunmore's supervision. You'll report directly to Dr. Whitmore as lead surgical nurse for his cases. Consider it a lateral move with a pay increase. I stared at the folder, unable to speak. Don't make me regret this, Margaret said. Yes, ma'am, I whispered. Patricia was still standing there, frozen in shock. Her carefully constructed world had collapsed in less than 20 minutes, and she looked like a woman who just watched her house burn down. Get out, Margaret said to her. Now. Patricia walked to the door, her movements stiff and mechanical. But before she left, she turned back to look at me. You'll regret this, she said quietly. You have no idea what you've started. Then she was gone. The door closed behind her, and the silence that followed was heavy with exhaustion. Dr. Whitmore put a hand on my shoulder. You did good, Rodriguez. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia's words carried more weight than a simple threat. She built an empire in this hospital over 15 years. She had allies, connections, people who owed her favors. And I just torn it all down in one afternoon. What happens now? I asked. Margaret sat back down at her desk. Now we rebuild. And we make sure nothing like this ever happens again. But as I walked out of that office, I couldn't stop thinking about the look in Patricia's eyes. The kind of look that promised consequences. The kind of look that said this war was far from over. The days after the meeting blurred together like watercolors in rain. Patricia Dunmore was escorted out of Metropolitan General that same afternoon, her badge deactivated, her office sealed with yellow caution tape while Jennifer Torres's audit team combed through 15 years of records. I watched from the surgical wing window as she walked across the parking lot toward her car, her spine straight and her head high, refusing to show weakness even in defeat. But I knew better. I'd seen the look in her eyes before she left. The kind of look that promised this wasn't over. The hospital tried to keep the investigation quiet, but hospitals are small worlds with loud voices. By the next morning, everyone knew. Nurses whispered in break rooms. Residents exchanged knowing glances in the corridors. And patients, the ones who'd survived Patricia's negligence, started asking questions. Mrs. Kowalski was one of them. I visited her in recovery 3 days after her surgery. She was sitting up in bed, her gray hair pulled back in a loose braid, and 4 lines running into her left arm. When she saw me, her face broke into a tired smile. You're the nurse, she said. The one who saved my life. I pulled up a chair next to her bed. Dr. Whitmore saved your life. I just handed him the right instruments. She shook her head slowly. My daughter told me what happened. She said you disobeyed orders to be in that operating room. She said if you hadn't been there, I'd be dead right now. Her voice cracked on the last word, and tears filled her eyes. I have 3 grandchildren. The youngest just turned 2. I was supposed to watch her next weekend while my daughter goes to a job interview. She reached out and grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Thank you. Thank you for caring enough to break the rules. I stayed with her for 20 minutes, answering questions, explaining what had happened during the surgery, reassuring her that the hospital was taking steps to make sure nothing like this happened again. But when I left her room, I felt the weight of it all settle on my shoulders like a lead blanket. How many other patients hadn't been as lucky? How many people had walked into Metropolitan General trusting that we'd keep them safe, only to become statistics in Patricia Dunmore's performance reports? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my small Brooklyn apartment, staring at the water-stained ceiling and listening to the sound of traffic on Flatbush Avenue. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Dr. Chen. Torres found 12 more cases, going back 18 months. All Patricia. All covered up. 12 more. 12 people who trusted us. 12 families who deserve answers. I rolled over and stared at the wall. My promotion to lead surgical nurse came with a 15% raise and a new office next to the prep rooms. Dr. Whitmore told me I'd earned it. Margaret Ashford called me a whistleblower and a model for professional integrity. But none of it felt like victory. The audit took 6 weeks. Jennifer Torres worked through weekends, pulling records, interviewing staff, reconstructing a pattern of negligence that stretched back almost 2 years. In the end, her report was 300 pages long and damning in its conclusions. Patricia Dunmore had systematically prioritized hospital revenue over patient safety, clearing high-risk patients for procedures to meet surgical volume targets. She'd silenced dissent by firing or intimidating anyone who questioned her judgment. And she'd used the reputations of respected surgeons like Dr. Chun as shields to deflect scrutiny. The state nursing board revoked her license permanently. The hospital settled with 7 families out of court, paying damages that totaled close to $4 million. And Metropolitan General implemented new protocols, mandatory secondary reviews for all pre-op assessments, anonymous reporting systems for staff concerns, and quarterly audits of surgical outcomes. But for me, the real change came in smaller moments. It came when Keisha from administration stopped by my new office with coffee and told me she'd reported a medication error without fear of retaliation. It came when a first-year resident asked me to review a case because he wasn't sure about the imaging results, and I spent an hour teaching him what to look for instead of dismissing his concerns. It came when Dr. Chun started personally reviewing every single one of his cases, double-checking assessments, asking questions, refusing to delegate responsibility to anyone else. We were rebuilding. Slowly, one case at a time. 3 months after Patricia's termination, I was scrubbing in for an emergency appendectomy when Dr. Whitmore pulled me aside in the prep room. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low. "Patricia's appealing the board's decision. She's hired a lawyer, and she's claiming that you and I conspired to frame her in retaliation for legitimate performance concerns." My stomach clenched. "Can she do that?" "She can try. It won't go anywhere. Torres's audit is airtight, and we have documentation for everything. But it means you might have to testify. You might have to sit in a hearing room and relive all of this in front of a panel of strangers." He paused. "I wanted you to hear it from me first." I leaned against the sink, the hot water still running over my hands. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to walk away, to transfer to another hospital, to leave this fight behind and start fresh somewhere else. But then I thought about Mrs. Kowalski's grandchildren. I thought about the 7 families who'd received settlements. I thought about Maria and Devin, who'd been punished for trying to do the right thing. "When's the hearing?" I asked. "January 15th. I nodded. "I'll be there." Whitmore put a hand on my shoulder. "You're tougher than you look, Rodriguez." "I have to be," I said quietly. We walked into the OR together, and I lost myself in the rhythm of the work, the sterile instruments, the steady beep of monitors, the controlled chaos of saving a life. This was why I became a nurse. Not for the politics or the power struggles, but for this. For the knowledge that my hands could make a difference. The hearing came and went. Patricia's appeal was denied. The board upheld their decision, and her nursing license remained revoked. I testified for 3 hours, answering questions from lawyers who tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee with a vendetta. But the evidence spoke louder than their insinuations. The imaging records, the audit findings, the testimonies from Dr. Chun, Dr. Whitmore, and a dozen other staff members who'd witnessed Patricia's behavior over the years. When it was over, I walked out of that hearing room into the cold January air and felt something shift inside me. Not relief, exactly. Not triumph, but something quieter. Something like peace. I'd done what I set out to do. I'd protected patients. I'd stood up to someone who'd weaponized their authority. And I'd survived. The cost had been high, sleepless nights, legal stress, the constant weight of knowing that one wrong move could have ended my career. But I'd do it again, because that's what it means to be a nurse. Not just following orders or checking boxes, but standing in the gap between life and death and refusing to let anything, politics, fear, or pressure, compromise the people who trust us with their lives. 6 months later, I was promoted again, this time to surgical nursing coordinator, overseeing a team of 12 nurses across 3 operating rooms. I implemented the secondary review protocols that Torres had recommended. I created mentorship programs for new nurses, and I made it clear, in every meeting and every training session, that speaking up was not just allowed, it was expected. One afternoon in late summer, I was reviewing schedules in my office when someone knocked on the door. I looked up to see a young woman in scrubs, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and a badge that read J. Martinez, surgical nurse. "Can I help you?" I asked. She hesitated in the doorway. "I heard about what you did, about Patricia Dunmore, about how you stood up to her even when it could have cost you everything." I gestured for her to sit down. "What's going on?" She took a breath. "There's a doctor on the 4th floor. He's been pressuring nurses to chart medications before they're administered. He says it saves time. But I know it's a violation. I know it's dangerous. And I'm scared to report it because he has connections. And everyone says he's untouchable." I looked at her, this young nurse, barely out of school, carrying the weight of a secret that could save lives or destroy her career. And I thought about the girl I'd been 3 months ago, standing in a scrub room with Patricia Dunmore's threat ringing in my ears. "Here's what we're going to do," I said. "You're going to write down everything, dates, times, specific incidents. I'm going to forward it to Jennifer Torres in risk management. And we're going to make sure this doctor learns that nobody is untouchable when patient safety is at stake." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "This is going to be hard. You're going to face pushback. People are going to question your motives. But you're doing the right thing. And I'll be with you every step of the way." She left my office, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the framed photo on my desk, a picture of me and my nursing school classmates on graduation day, all of us smiling and hopeful and naive about what this job would really cost. I wasn't that girl anymore. I'd learned that doing the right thing doesn't always feel heroic. Most of the time, it feels terrifying. It feels lonely. It feels like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing to jump because the alternative, staying silent, playing it safe, is a different kind of death. But I'd also learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite it. And every time someone like J. Martinez walked into my office, scared but determined to speak up, I knew that what I'd done, what I'd risked, had been worth it. Because change doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in small acts of defiance. In nurses who refuse to chart medications they haven't given. In residents who ask questions when something doesn't feel right. In surgical coordinators who create systems that protect whistleblowers instead of punishing them. It happens one choice at a time, one patient at a time, one voice at a time. And now, whenever I walk into an operating room, I carry that truth with me. Not as a burden, but as a promise. A promise that I will never let fear, politics, or pressure make me forget why I became a nurse. A promise that I will stand up, speak out, and fight for the people who can't fight for themselves. Because at the end of the day, that's all any of us can do. Show up, do the work, and refuse to look away when something is wrong. That's what it means to be a nurse. That's what it means to be human. And that's a lesson I learned the hard way, in a scrub room, on a Tuesday morning, when my boss told me to stay out of the OR, and I walked in anyway. I still work at Metropolitan General. Dr. Whitmore retired last year, and I gave a speech at his farewell dinner, thanking him for teaching me that integrity matters more than approval. Dr. Chen runs the surgical department now, and he's built a culture where questioning protocols is seen as professionalism, not insubordination. Mrs. Kowalski sends me a card every Christmas with pictures of her grandchildren. And J. Martinez, she's one of my best nurses now, confident, outspoken, unafraid to challenge authority when patient safety is at stake. Patricia Dunmore never worked in healthcare again. I don't know where she is now, and I don't spend time thinking about it. Some battles end not with reconciliation, but with distance. What I do know is this: the system that allowed her to thrive for 15 years is changing. Slowly, imperfectly, but changing. And I'm part of that change. Not because I'm special or fearless, but because I made a choice. One choice. On one Tuesday morning. To walk into an operating room when I was told to stay out. Everything else followed from that. If you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between following orders and doing what you knew was right, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and let me know, would you have walked into that, or would you have risked everything to stand up for what you believed in? And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. Because there are more stories like this. Stories about people who refused to stay silent, who fought back against systems designed to crush them, and who came out the other side changed but unbroken. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's build a community where speaking truth to power isn't just encouraged, it's expected.